The year 2025 has brought with it a series of developments that few could have anticipated, but perhaps none as unexpected or as transformative as the military breakthrough achieved by Nigeria. A breakthrough that has reverberated far beyond Africa's borders and even caught the attention of Europe in ways that have left political, military, and economic observers grappling with its implications. Nigeria, often referred to as the giant of Africa due to its immense population, vast natural resources, and pivotal position in West Africa, has long been viewed as a country with great potential, but also beset by persistent challenges, ranging from corruption and security threats to economic volatility. Yet in 2025, Nigeria has shifted the global conversation not with its oil, not with its music or culture, but with a bold and unprecedented leap in military capability that has startled not only its regional neighbors, but also Europe, which now finds itself rethinking its strategic calculations. The roots of this story trace back decades to Nigeria's struggles with insurgencies, terrorism, and organized crime, most notably the Boko Haram crisis that destabilized much of the country's northeast. For years, Nigeria relied heavily on imported military hardware, foreign advisors, and assistance from Western partners to try to subdue insurgencies that were adaptive, resilient, and deeply entrenched. Despite billions spent, progress was slow, morale often fragile, and the Nigerian military's reputation suffered repeated blows. It was in this crucible of hardship that a new vision was slowly forged, one that saw Nigeria's leadership realize that true sovereignty required not just political independence, but technological, industrial, and military self-sufficiency. That realization has now culminated in 2025 with the unveiling of a breakthrough so profound that Europe, accustomed to viewing Africa as a dependent partner rather than a technological innovator, is now forced to take notice. The breakthrough in question is not a single weapon, nor a flashy parade of imported jets or tanks, but rather the establishment of Nigeria's first fully indigenous military-industrial complex capable of producing advanced weapon systems, drones, armored vehicles, and communications technology that rivals that of established global powers. For decades, Nigeria had attempted to establish such capabilities, but was hamstrung by corruption, lack of expertise, and dependence on external suppliers. What changed in the years leading up to 2025 was the convergence of three key factors: Nigeria's investment in education and research, a decisive policy shift toward technological sovereignty, and partnerships not with the West, but with alternative powers like China, Russia, and Turkey, who provided blueprints, knowledge transfer, and training under terms more favorable than Western conditionality. The world first began to realize something had shifted when the Nigerian armed forces unveiled a fleet of domestically produced drones with advanced surveillance and strike capabilities. These drones were not rudimentary, as skeptics had assumed, but equipped with sophisticated targeting systems, electronic countermeasures, and artificial intelligence-assisted flight capabilities that rivaled Western equivalents. Within months, these drones were deployed effectively in operations against terrorist enclaves, where they provided Nigeria with unprecedented precision and situational awareness. Insurgents who once operated with relative impunity under forest cover or across porous borders suddenly found themselves hunted by eyes in the sky that they could not evade. The international defense community began asking, how did Nigeria achieve this level of technological sophistication in such a short span of time? What followed was an even greater shock. Nigeria revealed not just drones, but a domestically produced fleet of armored vehicles designed for both conventional and asymmetric warfare. These vehicles, unlike the outdated imports of the past, were adapted specifically for Nigeria's terrain, capable of maneuvering through swampy riverine areas, arid deserts, and dense forests with equal ease. They incorporated modular armor technology, making them resistant to improvised explosive devices, a weapon that had devastated Nigerian forces in previous decades. Moreover, these vehicles were not merely prototypes, but mass-produced units already. Integrated into the Nigerian Army's frontline formations, Europe, watching closely, recognized the strategic implications. For decades, Africa had been a market for European arms exports, with France, the United Kingdom, and others supplying the continent's militaries while maintaining a sense of dependency. Nigeria's breakthrough, however, meant that Africa's most populous nation was no longer merely a customer, but a producer, one that could potentially shift the balance of the arms trade itself. European defense contractors, already squeezed by rising competition globally, now face the prospect of an African competitor capable of producing cheaper, terrain-optimized equipment with minimal foreign oversight. The ripple effects across the global arms market began to show almost immediately. Perhaps what startled Europe most, however, was not the drones or the armored vehicles, but Nigeria's demonstration of an indigenous satellite network designed specifically for military communication and intelligence gathering. Satellites had long been the domain of spacefaring nations, and while Nigeria had launched satellites before with foreign assistance, this new system was largely homegrown, designed with cybersecurity protocols that made it resilient against external interference. By integrating satellite communication with their drone and vehicle fleets, Nigeria created a modern, networked battlefield environment, previously unimaginable for an African state. This network provided real-time coordination, data sharing, and target acquisition that elevated Nigeria's military capacity into a new league. The European Union's response was swift and layered. On one hand, European leaders issued statements, praising Nigeria's progress as a sign of Africa's modernization, cloaked in diplomatic language about partnership and cooperation. Yet behind the scenes, there was palpable anxiety. European think tanks began publishing reports warning that Nigeria's newfound capabilities could embolden it to take a more assertive role in West Africa, challenging long-standing European influence in the region. France, in particular, which has long viewed Francophone West Africa as its sphere of influence, now faced the reality that Nigeria, an Anglophone giant, was technologically and militarily outpacing its Francophone neighbors, threatening to redraw. The geopolitical map of the Sahel, the Nigerian breakthrough, also had profound implications for security cooperation. For years, Nigeria had been heavily reliant on U.S. and European military aid, training programs, and intelligence sharing. Now, however, Nigeria began to speak the language of equality rather than dependency. Nigerian officials declared that, while they welcomed cooperation, it would no longer be on the basis of subordination or paternalism. Instead, Nigeria positioned itself as a regional power capable of contributing to African security independently. This posture resonated across the continent, inspiring other nations to reconsider their reliance on Western military support and sparking conversations about Pan-African defense cooperation. But what about the West African people themselves? For many Nigerians, the military breakthrough was not simply about prestige or geopolitics, but about safety and dignity. For decades, ordinary Nigerians had suffered the consequences of insecurity, from terrorist bombings to mass kidnappings. The ability of their military to now provide effective security was a source of immense national pride and hope. Families who once lived in fear of Boko Haram raids in Borno State or bandit attacks in Zamfara began to report a newfound sense of safety as Nigerian forces leveraged their new capabilities to disrupt and dismantle criminal networks. This did not go unnoticed abroad. The European press, often critical of Nigeria in the past, began running headlines acknowledging the success of Nigeria's domestic security campaigns. At the same time, European governments quietly recalibrated their policies, realizing that Nigeria's rise as a military power meant that the traditional paradigm of aid and dependency was shifting irreversibly toward partnership and competition. The shock in Europe was not only about Nigeria's achievements, but about the speed at which they had been accomplished, defying the stereotype of African incapacity that had long permeated Western discourse. Another layer to Nigeria's breakthrough that rattled Europe was its economic implications. A military-industrial complex is not just about producing weapons, it is about stimulating research, creating jobs, and building a technological ecosystem. Nigeria's defense industry began, creating spillover effects in civilian sectors, from advanced manufacturing to cybersecurity and artificial intelligence. Nigerian universities, once struggling with brain drain, suddenly found themselves at the center of a national research renaissance as students and professors were recruited into defense-related innovation. The message was clear. Nigeria was not only defending its territory, but building an economy of the future. The reaction from Europe was mixed. Some saw Nigeria's rise as an opportunity for new forms of cooperation, while others viewed it as a strategic threat. European defense analysts warned that Nigeria could export weapons and military technology to other African nations, thereby reducing Europe's influence over the continent's security architecture. At the same time, African leaders began to take note of Nigeria's example, with some sending delegations to Abuja to study the Nigerian model of military self-sufficiency. The idea of an Africa less dependent on Western arms and aid began to crystallize into a tangible reality. The geopolitical implications did not stop at Africa. Global powers such as China and Russia seized on Nigeria's breakthrough as evidence that Western dominance was waning, and they quickly moved to deepen ties with Abuja. European policymakers, already uneasy about China's Belt and Road Initiative in Africa, now faced the prospect of Nigeria aligning more closely with Eurasian powers, thereby undermining Western leverage on the continent. Yet, amidst all the diplomatic maneuvering, one fact remained undeniable. Nigeria's breakthrough was not the product of outside imposition, but of internal resolve. This was a nation that had endured years of hardship, instability, and external pressure, yet had emerged stronger, more self-reliant, and more determined to chart its own path. The symbolism of Africa's most populous nation, achieving military self-sufficiency and technological prowess, sent a psychological shockwave through Europe, challenging centuries-old assumptions about who held power and who did not. As we look at 2025 in retrospect, the story of Nigeria's military breakthrough is not just about weapons or geopolitics, but about identity, sovereignty, and transformation. Europe may be shocked today, but the deeper reality is that Nigeria's success represents a broader shift across Africa, one where nations are increasingly determined to define their futures on their own terms, without the dictates of former colonial powers or external actors. The shock in Europe may fade with time, replaced by adaptation and new strategies of engagement, but for Nigeria and Africa as a whole, 2025 will be remembered as the year when a long-standing narrative of dependency was shattered, replaced by a vision of strength, innovation, and self-determination. It is a story still unfolding, but one thing is clear. The tremors from Nigeria's breakthrough are being felt far and wide, and the world will never look at Africa the same way again.